Hello there. Good evening, everybody. It's really weird actually knowing that there is an audience there, but not actually being able to see anybody. I've had lots of lovely messages from people during the day and yesterday, so thank you very much for all of those. I will try to reply to them when I can. That was a beautiful day today. I hope it was where you are. But it's very strange because all of the days are feeling exactly the same. But I think this is Tuesday again, and it is 7:30. So it's time for my reading from the Walled Garden. Just before I begin that, I'd like again to say thank you to Simon and Roz Lewis, whose brainchild this holding cell is. And they have invited many, many writers to take part in these live streaming exercises. I think it's a great initiative, and I'm very happy to be part of it. I read somewhere today, actually, that this is National Poetry Month in the US. Not here, but certainly in the US. So I thought it might be the time to mention this, which is Dunne, which is Simon Lewis's prize-winning poetry collection from 2015, filled with poetry which I am enjoying again immensely. Poems about family, about loss of identity, and about, I suppose, in a way, finding out where you are and who you are. And in some strange way, they have a resonance for all of the things which I think all of us are going through today. Okay, so this is my third novel, published way back in the year 2000. And it's funny, when I was reading through the pages today, just getting ready for this evening, it struck me about how many situations which are described throughout the novel which wouldn't happen today because of the ubiquity of mobile phones. So this is a family story. Family is the area that I like to work in. I think there is no better theatre. And it deals with the story of Beth and her brother James and their mother Alice. Alice doesn't have long to live, so Beth has returned from many years in London to where she escaped when she was a teenager. James, her brother, has stayed at home, holding the fort, as it were. So when I began writing the novel, my focus was absolutely on Beth, on the prodigal daughter, if you like, returning to look after her mother in her final days. And this is something which I think a lot of writers will identify with. As I wrote the story of Alice, who was the mother, kind of tapped me on the shoulder and said, no, hang on, I have a story here too, and my story deserves to be told. Which presented me with something of a problem, because at the beginning of the novel, in my head, Alice had had a stroke and she wasn't able to speak and spent most of the days asleep. But it was a great challenge to go and reinvent her story, to bring her to the time where she meets, although she doesn't know it, but her daughter returns. She meets with her daughter again, who comes back really, I suppose, looking for reconciliation. And I think that's probably why so many of the poems in Simon's beautiful collection resonated with me in recent days. Okay, so this is Beth arriving late from the airport, and her brother James is waiting for her in the family home. He was standing at one of the downstairs windows. He had a book in his left hand, closed over the index finger, marking his place. The short, capable fingers of his right hand restlessly combed the grey hairs of his beard. Beth had known he would be standing there just like that, felt the familiar mix of tenderness and impatience as he stooped, peering short-sightedly through the bottom pane. Making sure it was her, she supposed. She wondered what he would do if it were someone else. Would he not answer the door anyway, no matter who it was? Why stand so thoroughly on guard all the time? The thought made her feel guilty. He was worried about her. She was late. It was normal, a warm, brotherly reaction. She turned the car in the broad driveway and pointed it towards the house, the wheels spitting out gravel. The hazy sweep of headlights caught the wooden plaque on the right-hand side of the front door. Woodvale. Even the name started a tug somewhere towards the bottom of Beth's heart. It spoke of tranquility and shelter, something which she felt this house had not offered her, not since she was a very small child. Somebody, no doubt James, had picked out the black lettering again, and the wood was shiny with new varnish. She had never known a man with such passion for detail. He was at the car window even before she switched off the ignition. Beth, are you all right? I was getting worried. His eyes were a deep blue, magnified behind the solid lenses of his glasses. Before she had time to reply, before she was even properly out of the car, he put both his arms around her and pulled her to him. She was at least a head taller than he was, and she had the impression of being hugged by a large, overgrown boy. He was doing his best to balance a huge umbrella over their heads. I'm fine, she smiled at him. We were almost an hour late taking off. Fog at Heathrow. I thought you might have had car trouble at this end. I was going to ring Laura in a little while, but I didn't want to worry her. I'm glad you're here. He was taking her case out of the boot, folding her coat over his arm, motioning towards her for the car keys. Minding her again. She took the umbrella from him. I can do it, James, she began, handing over the keys nevertheless. Although his hands were full, he managed to lock the driver's door with ease. The taillights flashed twice as he switched on the alarm. Nonsense, you look exhausted, you're like a ghost. Come on inside, the fire's lit. Beth followed him into the large front sitting room, feeling too tired to argue. The familiar pattern of the leader and the led was instantly re-established, as though all the intervening years had suddenly fallen away, crumbling to nothing under her feet, like a rickety bridge in a bad dream. It was almost as if the past decades had never happened. They were swept away abruptly, completely, by this surge of the familiar. Beth was irritated and comforted at the same time by all the old assumptions she could read in her brother's broad, slightly stooped shoulders. They obviously weren't going to talk about anything until they were inside, until he judged that she was ready. Even in times of crisis, James's instinctive hospitality had never deserted him. She handed him the duty-free bag. Your namesake. He peered inside, knowing exactly what he would find. Jemison. And he beamed at her, his eyes glinting. He became immediately busy. Gin and tonic for you? Beth nodded. Let me just give Laura a quick call to let her know I've arrived, Beth said. I'll be back in a minute. When she returned, glasses had appeared from the cabinet in the corner. There was the chinking of ice. There was even a lemon, sliced, waiting damply under cling film. How long had he been standing there at the window, prepared, waiting for her? You sit down, sis. I'll get the drinks. Sis. The word suddenly brought Beth back 40 years. Their first trolley, a proud wooden structure with ball bearings for wheels and a steering mechanism made out of string. She remembered its smooth, planed seat and the smell of oil from the sturdy handles her dad had fixed at either side. She could see herself in tears of frustration, unable to go either forwards or backwards. Her legs were too short. She couldn't get the necessary momentum to send her whizzing down the grassy slope. Suddenly, two warm hands were on her back, James's voice at her ear. Hang on tight, sis, and I'll push you. Keep your feet on the steering bar and don't move them until I tell you. Rippling shafts of sunlight pierced the bright green of the trees on either side as Beth hurtled down the hill. She liked the feel of stronger, older hands on her back. Here you go. Beth took the glass James offered her. and settled herself in the armchair on the opposite side of the fire to his. His book was now open, face down on the floor beside his chair. She strained to see its title, a biography of Cromwell this time. Sometimes Beth felt that James kept on reading while he waited for his life to begin. She had never understood his passion for history. All those dates, all those long drawn-out battles, all that endless rummaging around in the past. Even as a child, he'd never gone through an Enid Blyton phase like everyone else had. He'd never hungered for the next Secret Seven or Famous Five adventures, where children led lives impossibly different from theirs, where parents were conveniently absent and picnics were an everyday wonder on islands in caves near mountaintops, with 3 types of lemonade and lashings of food. James had always preferred reality, badgering his mother to get him books from the adult library from the time he was 10. "How is she?" Beth asked finally. He shrugged. "You know, much the same. The nurse will come in at this time every evening to settle her for the night. Sometimes she gets restless, but most of the time she just sleeps. I think the sedative they've prescribed for her is pretty heavy stuff." James sipped at his glass thoughtfully. Beth had the feeling that he was choosing his words carefully. "Does she know you, James?" "Sometimes I think she does. A couple of times in the hospital she pressed my hand, and she's opened her eyes once or twice. But to be honest, I don't even know if she saw me. It's very hard to tell." James's voice had gone quiet. He turned his back to Beth and began to poke the fire vigorously. The silence between them was not an uncomfortable one. Beth looked around the room, taking in its shabby grandeur. It was a big, sprawling old Victorian house. But every time Beth came back, she was struck by how small it was compared to her childhood memories. Then the rooms had been vast, bright, honey-coloured deserts in summer, huge, bare, freezing plains in winter, where a game of hide and seek could take all day. The broad, pockmarked floorboards had been varnished again, but the old rug was now badly worn in places. The fabric and the sagging armchairs were threadbare. She felt suddenly overwhelmed by a sense of being home. A great wave of affection washed over her as she watched James's bent back, heard the orange and red sigh of turf briquettes as they hit the flames. When he turned back to her, his round face was glowing from the heat. "I'm sorry I couldn't come sooner," she said. He smiled down at her, his back to the fire, hands spread behind him towards the flames. "That's okay, sis. They only let her home this afternoon. The easiest thing for me was to move some stuff in straight away. I'm glad you're here now, though." "Are you still going to stay over?" Beth did not want to be left on her own. Ever since James's phone call, she had felt as though she were drowning in quicksand. She'd flailed uselessly from one activity to the next. She'd have delayed for much longer too, had it been up to her. Even her own daughter had been puzzled by her slowness. On the night of James's call, it was Laura who kept saying, "But Mum, you have to go now." And Tony had been angry, which had surprised her. She'd hardly ever seen him angry before, not even while they were still married. It was his strength of feeling that had finally jolted Beth into some form of reality. Without it, she knew she'd have allowed herself to be dragged down by a creeping paralysis, sucked under by inertia. She had moved, dreamlike, from one urgent task to the next, her limbs leaden, her mind soggy and unresponsive. Now that she was finally here, the thought of being left on her own filled her with alarm, especially as the dying woman upstairs was her mother. Okay, thank you very much for your patience. Thank you for being here this evening. If anybody would like to leave a comment on Facebook, or if you have a request or something you'd like me to read, please say so, and I will do my best. And this is, yes, it's still Tuesday, so I will see you again on Thursday. Bye for now. Stay well, stay safe, and stay home, particularly this weekend. Good night.